It's our money, so it's our wedding to plan. That was my mother at her kitchen table the night she rewrote my guest list, called the venue I had not chosen, and told me which dress I would wear down the aisle. I pushed back once. My father stood behind her and said, "If you push back again, we won't come." And then they slid a new sheet of paper across to me. New restrictions, new rules. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't run. I drove home, I slept 8 hours. I went to work. 3 weeks later, at the rehearsal dinner, when my father stood up with a glass of wine in his hand to tell 28 people that he and my mother had spent $80,000 to give me the day I deserved, I reached into my purse and slid a manila envelope across the table. He opened it. He read the date on the first page, and his voice dropped. "If your stomach is already in a knot, please hit that like button and subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it tells me to keep telling these. Drop your city and the time you're listening from in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you are hearing me from. I'm Ruth, I'm 30, and this is the story of an envelope I had been preparing since I was 22. Let's go back to the night I learned what my father meant when he said the word family. Wesley proposed at the Lighthouse Festival in Portland on July 12th, 2024. It was a Friday, and it was the kind of damp coastal July evening where the wind off Casco Bay smells like salt and engine oil, and the booths at the festival are selling boiled lobster in paper trays. He took me to the long pier just before the fireworks started. The harbor was the color of pewter. A pair of seagulls were fighting over a French fry under the railing. He had a small ring in his pocket because he is a structural engineer, and structural engineers do not buy big rings. The diamond was 1/4 of a carat. He had picked it out from a jeweler on Forest Avenue named Hal, who repaired his grandfather's watch. He said, "Ruth, I have known I wanted to marry you since the second week. I waited 4 years because you needed me to. Will you marry me now?" I said yes. I said it once, and I said it quietly, and I held his hand the way I always do, with 2 fingers around his thumb. Behind us, the fireworks started, and I watched his face in the flashes. He looked relieved, like he had been holding his breath for 4 years. He had been, and inside my head, while my fiancé held me on that pier, I was already running a calculation I had been running for 8 years. I knew exactly what I had in the credit union account up north. I knew what I could afford to spend on a wedding and still keep my floor under me. I knew which vendors were within driving distance of Portland and which ones would charge a coastal markup. I knew that the only thing I had to do now was make sure my parents did not find out. I knew also that there was no version of the next 14 months in which my parents did not insert themselves. That was not a thing they had ever not done. That was simply who they were. I would fail at the keeping them out part. I would not fail at the rest. 3 days later, my parents threw an engagement dinner at their house on Pemberton Place. My father, Russell Donahue, 62, retired landscaper, raised his Sunday best wine glass in front of my Aunt Patty and my mother and Wesley's parents, Patricia and Frank Brennan, and he said the line that started everything. "Marlene and I will cover the whole wedding," he said. "Every penny. We have been saving for this since Ruth was born." He looked at my fiancé's mother when he said it, and Patricia Brennan, who is 64 and has been a nurse practitioner in 3 states and reads people the way Wesley reads load-bearing walls, set down her wine glass and looked at me. My mother, Marlene, 60, dental office assistant turned full-time hostess, clinked her glass against his and looked at me, too. The look said, "Don't ruin this." Wesley squeezed my hand under the table. We had talked about this. He had known for 20 months by then. We had a plan. The plan was, let them say what they were going to say. Let them think what they were going to think. Do not engage. We would handle the wedding the way I had always handled my money. Quietly, privately, by myself. 2 weeks later, my mother hired a wedding planner named Belinda Vance without asking me. Belinda was 48, blonde, the kind of woman who carried a leather Filofax in 2024. She had planned my cousin Tessa's wedding in the spring. My mother liked her because she ran every junior league fundraiser from Cumberland to Yarmouth. The day my mother announced the hire, she handed me a glossy folder Belinda had assembled with 3 potential venues, 3 potential florists, 3 potential caterers, and 1 potential dress designer. I had been given the illusion of choice in increments of 3. 3 weeks after that, my father put down a $22,000 deposit on Crowley Barn Venue in Falmouth on his own credit card without showing me the contract. The first time I saw the barn was at a tour my mother had scheduled on a Saturday morning with Belinda and Janet Crowley. Janet asked me, halfway through the walk, where I had thought about doing my ceremony. My mother answered for me. Janet noted it without comment and kept walking. In December, my mother walked me into a bridal boutique on Exchange Street and picked out a $4,500 ivory ball gown that I tried on 3 times and never once recognized myself in. The boutique was called Veiled, run by a woman named Olivia. The dress was off the shoulder with hand beading on the bodice. It was beautiful. It was not me. The mirror in the dressing room was 8 feet tall and lit from the side with a soft amber bulb. I stood in the dress for 60 seconds and watched a stranger stand in the mirror across from me. My mother stood behind me and said the word stunning 4 times in a row. In January, my mother put $11,000 onto Truffle Catering Company's deposit on her own card without asking me what I wanted to feed people. The chef was a man named Doug, who had trained in Boston and moved back to Portland to be near his mother. Doug emailed me twice in January with menu options. My mother replied to him both times, copying me, with the words she had already chosen. By February 2025, my parents had spent a little under $50,000 on deposits for a wedding they had never asked me to plan. Most of it on credit cards. Some of it on a small line of equity they had quietly opened against the house. None of it paid in full. Every contract said balance due 30 days before event. I knew the spreadsheet I had been keeping. I had been keeping it for 8 years. The summer I was 22, I lived in the attic of my parents' house on Pemberton Place, slept on a futon under a sloped ceiling, drove an '09 Toyota Corolla I had bought used with my college graduation money. I had a job at a coffee shop on Congress Street, where I made $15 an hour pulling shots and putting espresso powder on cappuccino lids in the shape of leaves. I had a degree in communications from the University of Southern Maine that nobody was hiring me to use yet. and I had $6,000 in a high-yield savings account at the Bank of America branch downtown. The $6,000 had been built slowly. $20 birthday gifts from my grandmother every June since I was 12, half of every paycheck from my coffee shop job. $240 from a high school graduation envelope from my Uncle Pete in Bangor, who had died of pancreatic cancer 3 months after I cashed his check. That envelope had said, on the outside, "For Ruthie, who is going to do something." I kept the envelope. On the morning of July 28th, 2018, a Saturday, I opened my banking app on the futon, and the balance was $62.11. I sat there for a long time. I did not panic. I did not call anyone. I closed the app, opened it again, refreshed the balance, and watched it stay at $62.11. There had been a wire transfer the day before. The destination was a small business account called Donahue Landscapes, LLC. I walked downstairs. My father was reading the Sunday paper at the kitchen island. He had not gone to church that morning. My mother was at the counter slicing a cantaloupe. I said, "Where did the $6,000 go?" He did not look up. He turned a page. He said, "Bills. The business, I will put it back." I said, "It was not in our joint account anymore. I moved it. How did you get to it?" He turned another page. "Don't be dramatic, Ruth." My mother came over to the table, smiling, and set down a plate of cantaloupe between us. And she said, "Money is just money. Family is forever. He'll put it back. Eat." I did not eat. I went outside to the garage. My father's landscaping equipment was lined up against the wall. There were 7 garden hoses in coils he had not sold in 2 years. There were 3 pallets of paving stones that had been there since the previous fall. There was a leaf blower with a piece of duct tape on the handle where the trigger guard had cracked. I stood there, and I understood. In the way you understand when you are 22 and your father will not look at you, that he was never going to put it back, and that what he had taken was not bills. It was his pride. I went back upstairs. I did not slam the door. I sat on the futon and I did the math. If I never let them touch $1 of mine again, what would I need to build to walk away? What would I need to have by the age of 30 to be able to be married, to be able to leave, to be able to refuse anything they ever offered me again? I wrote a number on a corner of a paper napkin I had carried up from the kitchen. The number was 80,000. I folded the napkin into the back of my wallet behind my driver's license. I kept it there. The next morning, Monday, July 30th, I drove 130 miles north on I-95 to Bangor, Maine. I left at 5 in the morning. I drove with the windows cracked, even though it was cool, because I needed to feel the air on my face. The traffic going north on I-95 on a Monday morning is mostly truckers carrying potatoes down from Aroostook County. I crossed the Penobscot at Hampton a little after 7:30. I went to a small credit union called Bangor Federal Credit Union in a strip mall on Hammond Street, between a Subway sandwich shop and a tax preparer. The lobby smelled like fresh coffee and old carpet. There were 3 teller windows and a kids' play corner with a wooden bead maze. A clock with a moose face on it said 7:53. I sat across from a woman named Linda, who had her hair pinned back with a butterfly clip. She wore a brown cardigan and had her name on a brass tag. She asked me, when I sat down, where I had driven from. I said, Portland. She raised her eyebrows. She said, Honey, we have branches in Portland too. I said I knew. I said I wanted this branch. She looked at me for a second. She had the eyes of a woman who had seen a lot of 22-year-old women sit at this desk. She did not ask another question. I opened an account in my name only with $52 cash, which was what I had in my wallet that morning. I asked her if statements were sent by mail. She said yes. I asked her if I could put down a P.O. box instead of my home address. She said yes. I did not put down my home address. I put down a P.O. box address I did not yet have. On the way back south, I stopped at the post office in Westbrook, 12 miles outside Portland, and rented a P.O. box for $12 a month. The clerk was an older man named Cal, who asked me what kind of business I was running. I told him I worked from home and needed a professional address. He said, Sure thing, kid. I drove back to Portland. I parked in my parents' driveway. My father was watching baseball in the den. He did not ask where I had been. My mother had left cantaloupe on the counter under plastic wrap with a note that said, For you. I left it there. I did not eat for the rest of the day. That night, August 4th, 2018, I wrote the rule into a small black moleskin notebook I had been given by an aunt the Christmas before. The rule said, 25% of every dollar I touch goes north, forever. Don't tell. I underlined the word forever twice. I drew a small box around the word don't. August 4th, 2018 was the day I opened the account. I never told a soul. The first wedding I ever shot was on September 21st, 2018, for a friend from college named Andrea, who got married in her parents' barn in Leamington for $300. Andrea had had a small budget. Her parents were school teachers. She had asked me at a college reunion picnic if I owned a camera. I said I would by September. I bought a used Nikon D700 at Cameras, etc. on Forest Avenue with 3 months of coffee shop tips and a tax refund. The body cost $340, the lens cost $90. I had read every YouTube tutorial about exposure I could find for 2 months. I had practiced on a sleeping cat and a sunrise and a bowl of fruit. I shot 290 frames at Andrea's wedding. I missed 3 obvious moments: the ring exchange focus, a candid laugh shot, and the cake cut where my flash misfired. I learned every one of those mistakes. I edited the photos for 6 nights straight on a 4-year-old MacBook from my undergraduate years. I delivered them on a flash drive in a small craft envelope I had made out of butcher paper. I got paid in cash in an envelope at the reception. I drove straight to Bangor the next day on a Sunday in the rain, in my Corolla, to deposit the $300. Linda, the butterfly clip teller, on a Sunday she was not supposed to be working but was covering for her sister, looked up at me from behind the counter and said, Welcome back, Miss Donahue. That was the moment I understood I had started something. Through 2019, I shot 11 weddings. Most of them were friends of friends. None of them were larger than 100 guests. I charged $600 by the end of that year. The Bangor account by November had $8,500 in it. I was working 3 jobs by then: the coffee shop, the weddings, and a part-time gig at Coast Print Company on Forest Avenue running the offset Heidelberg. Then March 2020 came, and the world stopped, and weddings canceled by the dozen. For 3 weeks, I cried in the basement of my parents' house, while my father played Fox News upstairs at full volume. Then I pivoted. I started shooting masked, socially distanced family portraits in clients' backyards for $50 a session. I wrote a free wedding photography PDF guide and built a small newsletter list. The Bangor account grew that year by $1,200. It still grew. In February 2021, on a Sunday, I shot the wedding of a woman named Rosa Vargas in a backyard in Cape Elizabeth, wearing a $7 wool coat I had bought at a thrift store called Found and Given on Brighton Avenue. I came back to Pemberton Place after midnight smelling like fire and frostbite. My father was up watching SportsCenter. He looked me up and down and said, "Ruthie, you look like a woman who can't take care of herself." I nodded. I went upstairs. The Bangor account that month had $34,800 in it. He did not know. By September 4th, 2023, the 5th anniversary of the day I opened the account, I had $61,200 at Bangor Federal Credit Union. I wrote in the moleskin, in pencil, 5 years, 61 halfway. That night, in my apartment on Park Avenue in Portland, I had finally moved out the year before into a studio above a Thai restaurant called Pad See You, where the dishwasher leaked through the floor of my closet once a season, $800 a month. I set up a small ring light I had bought used from a beauty influencer in South Portland, opened a free streaming account on YouTube, painted my own thumbnail with a flower the size of a lentil, hit go live, and recorded my first nail art live stream to 9 viewers. 3 of those viewers were Wesley. I had picked nail art because I wanted something that did not require me to be visible from the chin up. I could film my hands and a small piece of cardboard backdrop and never show my face. I had also picked it because I had been doing my own nails since I was 16, and the small motor skills of it calmed me when nothing else did. The first stream was 43 minutes long. I painted a chrysanthemum on my left thumbnail. The chat had 4 messages. One of them was from a woman in Oklahoma who said her grandmother used to paint flowers like that. I cried a little after I closed the stream, not because I was sad, because someone in Oklahoma had seen me. By the end of the month, the channel had 600 subscribers and $17 in AdSense pending. By Christmas, the channel had 2,400 subscribers and $91 in pending. By the next September, the channel had 11,000 subscribers and was making me $300 a month every month in AdSense alone. I wasn't done. I was just hidden. The first time I met Wesley Brennan was at a small lighthouse-themed pub in Old Port on a Tuesday night in October 2021. The pub was called The Beacon. I had been there twice before. It had a tiny round table in the front window with a real ship's lantern on it. I was meeting a friend who never showed. He was meeting a friend who never showed. We were the 2 people sitting at the end of the bar at 6:30 wearing parkas and looking at our phones. We had both ordered the same beer, a local Allagash White on draft. The bartender, a man named Pete with a gray ponytail, looked at the 2 of us and said, "Either you 2 were stood up at the same time, or you're a couple I haven't met yet." He bought me 1 drink. He did not buy me a second one. I respected that. I had been on enough first dates in my 20s with men who tried to keep buying me drinks. He sat across from me on a bar stool and asked me what I did. I told him about Coast Print Company. I told him about the wedding photography on weekends. I did not tell him about Bangor. I had not told anyone about Bangor yet, and I would not tell him about Bangor for another 13 months. He listened to me talk about light meters for 40 minutes. He nodded in the right places. He did not interrupt to tell me about a camera his dad used to own. He asked me 3 questions, and then he asked me one more. What I would do with the photographs if no one paid me to take them. I said I would still take them. He said, "Then you're a photographer." I paid my own tab. He walked me out to my Corolla and asked for my number. He texted me the next morning at 8:11 asking if he could see me again on Friday. I said yes. Wesley was a structural engineer at Port Engineering Group in Portland. He grew up in Pittsburgh, came to Maine in 2017 for a job, kept staying because the coast made his shoulders relax. He kept a carpenter pencil in his breast pocket and pulled it out when he was thinking. He drove a 15-year-old Tacoma. He did not own a TV. The first 3 months we dated, he never said the word love. But he showed up on time to every single thing. In November 2022, on our 1-year anniversary, I took him to a small Italian place on Wharf Street called Vesta's. I had decided that morning, while I was getting dressed, that I was going to tell him. We ordered wine, we ordered scallops. And then I said, "Wesley, I need to tell you something I have not told anyone." He set down his fork. He did not interrupt me once. I told him about the $6,000. I told him about the Bangor Federal Credit Union. I told him about the P.O. box in Westbrook, the moleskin, the 25% rule, the napkin with 80,000 on it in the back of my wallet. I told him about the YouTube channel that was small and the wedding photography that was bigger than my day job. I told him I had $37,000 in an account my parents did not know existed, and that I planned to keep growing it until I had enough to walk away from anything they ever tried to do to me. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "Do you want me to do anything?" I said no. He said, "Then I won't." He did not tell my parents. He did not tell his parents. He did not bring it up again, ever, unless I brought it up first. He met my parents 9 times in the next 20 months. He held his face still through every one of them. At Christmas 2023, my mother said something rude about my hair in front of his entire family, and Wesley kept his face still. And in the car back to Portland, he said, "I don't like them, but you didn't ask me to." I fell in love with him that night in a way the spreadsheet could not measure. I had been training since I was 22 to not need anyone. And here was a man who had figured out on his own how to be loved by a woman who did not need him. He did not rescue me. He just stood close enough that I knew he would not run if it got loud. By the time he proposed, in July 2024, it had been 20 months of him knowing the whole plan. He never once leaked a hint. Not at the engagement dinner 3 days later, when my father stood up to take credit for a wedding fund that did not exist. Not at the engagement photo session my mother insisted on. Not at the cake tasting where my mother told the baker no to lemon and yes to her favorite. He just kept his hand on my back kept the carpenter pencil in his breast pocket, and waited for me to do whatever I was going to do. Janet Crowley sent the first text on the morning of July 21st, 2025. It was a Monday. I was at the print shop running the Heidelberg. The phone buzzed on the top of the offset cabinet. The text was polite and short. "Hi, Ruth. Sorry to message. Your dad's card declined on the final balance for the venue. Could you forward to him?" No rush. I forwarded it to my father, who did not reply for 3 days. Janet texted again the following Monday, July 28th. Same tone. "Hi, Ruth. Second attempt. Could you ask him to call the office?" I forwarded it. He did not reply. The third one came on the 1st of August, a Friday morning, at 9:14. "Hi, Ruth. I hate to keep bugging you. Card declined again. Need balance by August 15th, or we lose the date. Sorry." I read it standing in the alley behind Coast Print, smoking a cigarette I do not normally smoke. I had stopped smoking when I was 19. I had bought 1 pack 3 days before at a corner store in the West End, and I had been carrying it around in my purse, unopened, for 2 days. I lit one. I knew before I knew. I went home that night and I opened a website I had bookmarked 5 years ago and never used. It was the joint authorized observer view on my parents' credit card account, set up in 2020 under the cover of Helping Ruth Learn How to Budget. They had forgotten I had access. The statement for the family visa showed a balance of $28,400 on a $30,000 limit. The American Express had $19,000 on a $20,000 limit. The home equity line of credit had been drawn against in March for the catering deposit, in May for floral, in July for the band. My father had no income. My mother had no income. Their Social Security had not yet started. Their checking account had a balance of $2,100. The wedding was paid 22% in deposits. They were 78% bluffing. 2 days later, on August 2nd, Truffle Catering Company's accounts payable office sent my mother an email about the final balance. Subject line: Final balance for September 13th event, $11,000 outstanding. They CC'd me by mistake because their database had me down as the bride's email. I screenshotted it. I deleted the email from my inbox. I did not reply. The next morning, Saturday, August 3rd, I sat at the small Formica table in my Portland kitchen with a yellow legal pad of my own. The same pad my mother used, only she used hers to write rules, and I used mine to write numbers. I wrote down the names of the 14 vendors: the barn venue, the catering, the florist, Salt Coast Blooms, the DJ, the dress boutique, the cake, the rentals, the bartender service, the day of coordinator, the photographer, the videographer, the hair and makeup, the transportation, the ceremony musicians. I wrote what my parents had put down in deposits beside each. I wrote what was outstanding. I added a column for estimated balance to clear. I added them up, $47,218. I checked the Bangor Federal Credit Union app on my phone, 92,000 and change. I subtracted the 47 from the 92. 45,000 and change would still be mine. I called Janet Crowley at 9:14 the next morning, August 4th, 2025. 7 years. To the day from the morning I had opened the account. She picked up on the second ring. I heard wind in the background. She was outside the barn, walking the perimeter, the way I had seen her do at the venue tour. I said, "Janet, this is Ruth Donahue. I'm Wesley Brennan's fiancée. I'd like to pay the final balance on the venue myself and put the contract in my name. Is that possible?" There was a pause on her end that was about 3 seconds long. The wind stopped. She had gone inside. It was the pause of a woman who had been waiting a month to be asked this question by the right person. She said, "Honey, it has been possible for 4 months. Where would you like me to email the new paperwork?" I opened my laptop on the kitchen table. I navigated to the Bangor Federal Credit Union web portal, which I had only ever used at home on my own Wi-Fi. I typed the routing and account numbers Janet read to me into the ACH transfer field. I authorized $13,000 and 12 cents. The portal asked me twice if I was sure. I said yes twice. Janet emailed me a repapered contract with my name on the bride and contract holder line, and Wesley's on the secondary. I signed it electronically. I sent it back. I closed the laptop. I called the next vendor. In the next 4 weeks, I called 13 vendors. Some of them said yes immediately. Some of them asked questions. The florist Sabina Lopez at Salt Coast Blooms asked me on a Tuesday morning, while she was unloading buckets of eucalyptus from the back of her van behind the shop, "Did you want the centerpieces I designed with your mother, or did you want what you actually wanted?" I sat on that question for 30 seconds while I sat in my Corolla outside her shop. And then I picked Low Cosmos and Queen Anne's lace. No roses. The DJ Skip Holloway said, "Sure, no problem," and switched the playlist file's owner over to my email in 7 minutes. He texted me, half an hour later, the word "attaboy" in all caps with a small confetti emoji. The bartender service did not care who paid them as long as they got paid. The cake baker, a woman named Christine Marsh in South Portland, an older woman with white hair and arms covered in flour, said, "I'm not surprised," and repapered without asking another question. The wedding planner, Belinda Vance, was the hard one. Belinda was loyal to my mother in the way professionals get loyal to clients who feed them other clients in junior league circles. When I called her on August 13th, she said, "Ruth, honey, I work for the Donahues." I waited. I said, "Belinda, I want to send you something. Please read it." I forwarded her 3 things: the truffle catering email, the screenshot of my father's declined Crowley Barn text, and a 1-line statement from me. "I have been preparing for this since I was 22. She called me back 46 minutes later. Her voice was completely different. She said, "Ruth, my own daughter did the same thing 2 years ago. I'll repaper everything by Friday." On Friday she did. The dress was the last thing. The $4,500 ivory ball gown my mother had picked sat on a fitting room hook at a boutique on Exchange Street, with my name pinned to it. On a Sunday morning, August 25th, I drove an hour and 20 minutes northwest to a small inland town called Norway, Maine, to a vintage shop on Main Street I had read about in a wedding blog. The shop was called Aprons and Pearls. It was owned by a woman named B. Pickett, 68, who had buried a husband and was raising her grandson alone above the shop. B showed me a 1976 ivory crepe gown that had been worn by the daughter of a Lewiston dentist 49 years ago. The price tag said $380. I tried it on in a dressing room with a curtain instead of a door. I came out and looked in the mirror, and I saw a woman I recognized. B pinned it for alterations on the spot. She said, "Pick it up Friday." I said, "What do I owe you for the alterations?" She said, "Not $1, just send me the photo from the wedding." On Friday, August 29th, I picked up the dress in a soft garment bag and drove back to Portland with the windows down. That night, I made a list on my legal pad of the 14 contracts. Every one of them now said Ruth Donahue, contract holder. 14 contracts. My name on every one. 45,000 still mine. On Tuesday, September 9th, 2025, 3 days before the rehearsal dinner, my father called me at lunch. I was sitting at a picnic table outside the print shop eating a tuna sandwich on rye that Donna had made me from her wife's recipe. The picnic table was painted dark green. There was a small crow watching me from a dumpster. The phone buzzed. I looked at the name. I waited 2 rings. I answered. His voice was tight. The kind of tight he got when he was trying to make a salesman lower a price. He said, "I heard from Belinda you might be changing things." I said, "I'm not changing things, Dad. I'm just paying for them." There was a silence I had heard in childhood. The silence he used when he was about to say something he had not said out loud before. Then he said, "Ruthie, don't get cute with me. If you embarrass us in front of Wesley's family, you won't have a father." I held the phone away from my ear for a second. I looked at a seagull walking down the curb past my Corolla. The seagull had a French fry. I watched it eat the French fry. I put the phone back. I said, "Okay, Dad." He said, "Don't say okay like that. Say you understand me." I said, "I understand you." He hung up. I finished the tuna sandwich. The crow watched the whole time. I did not tell Wesley until that night. On Wednesday, September 10th, at 4:11 in the afternoon, my mother sent me a text that ran on for 430 words. It started with, "Ruth, your father and I have been talking, and we need to discuss your tone with us during this very emotional time." And it ended with, "Belinda told us you canceled the boutique pickup. Canceling a $4,500 dress at this point is unkind, and we expect you to retrieve it tomorrow." I read the text twice. I opened my notes app. I wrote in the column for September 12th, "Bring the spreadsheet, bring the napkin, bring the receipt from aprons and pearls. Wear the gray cardigan." That night in our apartment, Wesley made spaghetti and we ate at the kitchen table. I told him about my father's call. He listened. He twirled a fork. He said, "Do you want me to talk to him?" I said, "No." He said, "Then I won't." He poured me more wine. He set down the bottle. He said, "I'll be at the table tomorrow. I'll hold your hand under it, that's all. Unless you ask me for something else." I slept 8 hours that night for the first time in 2 weeks. Friday morning, September 12th, I woke at 6. Wesley was already up. I drove to Coast Print Company with the manila envelope folded inside a leather portfolio I had bought from a Bangor estate sale for $19. I went to the back room where the new Konica copier lived. I printed one Bangor Federal Credit Union account opening receipt scanned from my moleskin, dated August 4th, 2018. 96 rows of spreadsheet from the digital ledger I had been keeping, printed on legal-size paper. 14 repapered vendor contracts, a summary page, the aprons and pearls receipt for $380. My coworker Donna, 61, who had run the Heidelberg next to me for 7 years, walked past with a coffee, looked at me printing, and said, "Big day, kid." I said, "2 big days." She did not ask what was on the pages. She just said, "Go get 'em." I drove home at 4. I changed into a navy blouse and the gray cardigan and the black pencil skirt I had worn to 2 of Wesley's company dinners. I tied my hair back. I put the manila envelope into my purse. I drove with Wesley to Cape Elizabeth to Salt and Lobster on Two Lights Road. We arrived at 6:55. I had been carrying that envelope for 8 years. The paper had only been printed that morning. The Salt and Lobster restaurant sits on a bluff over the Atlantic on Two Lights Road in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. The dining room has gray-painted, shingled walls and large windows that look out toward Casco Bay. On Friday evening, September 12th, 2025, at 7 o'clock, 28 people were already seated around 3 long tables pushed together in a horseshoe. My family was on the left side of the horseshoe. My father wore the brown leather jacket he had bought in 1987, and which my mother had been threatening to throw out for the better part of 3 decades. My mother wore a coral knit dress and her grandmother's pearls. My Aunt Patty was beside her, and Patty's husband, Earl. Belinda, the wedding planner, sat at the foot of the table, watching the room. Wesley's family was on the right. His father, Frank, 66, retired industrial electrician from Pittsburgh, plaid shirt and a quiet face. His mother, Patricia, 64, in a dove gray cardigan. His sister, Maeve, 35, who had flown in from Minneapolis the night before, sat at the far end with her husband. Wesley's college roommate, Henry, sat opposite Maeve, looking awkward in a sport coat. The bridal party was scattered between us. 2 of my bridesmaids, Andrea, the friend I had shot for first in 2018, and a coworker named Janelle from the print shop, were on my side. Wesley's groomsmen sat across. Wesley and I sat in the middle. I had asked Belinda to seat us across from my parents, not next to them. The waitstaff poured a Tempranillo. The first course came out, lobster bisque in small white bowls. At 7:24, my father set his soup spoon down, lifted his wine glass, and stood up. The room quieted. He smiled the way he smiled at Junior League charity events. He projected his voice the way he projected it at Knights of Columbus banquets. He cleared his throat once, the way he had cleared his throat for every important speech I had ever heard him make. He looked exactly like the man who, when I was 11, had stood at a podium at the Portland Yacht Club and called himself Father of the Year. He said, "Folks, I want to take a moment before we go any further with this lovely meal to make something clear." I set down my spoon. Wesley put his hand on my knee under the table. He did not squeeze. He just rested it there. He had told me he would do exactly that. He kept his word. "Marlene and I," my father said, "have spent over $80,000 on this wedding." A small, audible sound came from Patricia Brennan's chair. She did not gasp. She just set down her wine glass with a small click against the wood of the table. "We have rewritten the guest list," my father went on, the way he might list construction milestones to a board of directors. Because Ruth's idea of an intimate gathering was not appropriate for our family's place in this community. We chose the venue because Crowley Barn has been on our shortlist since Ruth was 16. We picked out the dress because Ruth tried on a vintage one in her aunt's closet, and we knew that was not going to do. We chose the caterer because Truffle Catering is the only place in Portland we know personally. We have done all of this because we are the ones writing the check. He looked at me. And tonight we wanted to say, if Ruth disrespects this gift, she should know it can be taken back. Family is forever, but it is also a privilege. You earn it by treating your parents with the respect they deserve. He raised his glass. To Ruth, may you always remember where the money came from. I had heard threats from my father since I was 16. I had not heard them said out loud at a dinner table in front of 28 people. Nobody at the table raised their glass. Wesley's hand stayed on my knee. He did not move. He did not stand. He did not interrupt. He had promised he would not unless I asked. I did not stand up either. I reached into my purse. I pulled out the manila envelope. I laid it on the white tablecloth in front of me. I took one sip of water. I waited until my father was still standing, still holding his glass. I said, "Dad, before you finish, would you mind opening this?" He laughed, the small dry laugh he used when he was buying time. He set his wine glass down. He picked up the envelope. He turned it over once. He pulled out the first sheet. The first sheet was the photocopy of my account opening receipt at Bangor Federal Credit Union. He read it silently first. Then his eyes moved to the date in the upper right corner. His mouth opened slightly. He read aloud, slowly, the way you read aloud when you are buying time inside your own head. Bangor Federal Credit Union. Account opened. August 4th, 2018. His voice caught on the word 18. Patricia Brennan leaned forward. I said quietly, "Keep reading." He pulled the second sheet. It was the first page of the spreadsheet. 96 rows. Source column. Amount column. Balance column. The first row read, August 2018. Savings, $52. He did not read this one out loud. My mother reached across the corner of the table for it. He did not let go. They both held the page for a second. She pulled it slightly. He did not let it move. I watched my father, and I saw a thing I had never seen in my life. I saw him not know what to say. At 7:45, the door to the dining room opened. Janet Crowley walked in. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse and the black clog shoes she always wore at events. She carried a thin, spiral-bound booklet under her arm. She said, "I'm so sorry I'm late. Final confirmation packet for the bride, venue protocol. Reception is paid in full." She walked the perimeter of the table, found me, leaned down, set the booklet next to my place setting. She said kindly, "Congratulations, Ruth." My mother said, fast and bright, "Oh, I'll take that, dear." Janet did not look at her. She looked at me. Then she straightened up, and she said, in a voice that carried through the room because she was used to people in barns, "It needs to go to the contract holder. That's Ruth." The room got quiet in a particular way I have not heard since. Janet was a venue owner doing her job. She was not trying to embarrass anyone. She was not trying to make a scene. She was making sure her booklet went to the right person, because in 22 years of running a wedding venue, she had learned that you put the booklet in the bride's hands, not the bride's mother's hands. She looked at me one more time, and she said, "If anyone has questions about the venue, I'm here for the next hour." Then she nodded at Wesley's father, who nodded back, and she sat down at the empty chair near the door. She did not leave. My father had not put down the spreadsheet. I said, "Janet, would you read the bookings for everyone?" She opened the booklet. She read in her professional venue owner voice with no commentary. Crowley Barn Venue, booking under Ruth Donahue, paid in full August 4th, 2025. Salt Coast Blooms, florist, booking under Ruth Donahue, paid in full August 5th, 2025. Travel Catering Company Catering, booking under Ruth Donahue, paid in full August 8th, 2025. Skip Holloway, DJ, booking under Ruth Donahue, paid in full August 7th, 2025. Heritage Tent and Rentals, booking under Ruth Donahue, paid in full. Christine Marsh, Cake, booking under Ruth Donahue, paid in full. Belinda Vance, Planner, booking under Ruth Donahue, paid in full. She paused. She turned the page. She kept going through 14 vendors. Every one of them ended with the phrase, paid in full. She closed the booklet. She said, "Anyone with billing questions can find me afterward." She sat back down. Patricia Brennan whispered the word, "Oh." Wesley's father said audibly, "Good for her." I reached for the spreadsheet that my father had not put down. I gently took it from him. He let me take it. He let it go the way you let go of something that you are not sure was ever yours. I passed it down the table. 28 people looked at 96 rows. The source column read, print company salary 25%, wedding photography, YouTube, AdSense. The balance column started at $52 in August of 2018 and ended at $92,000 and change in March of 2025. Wesley's sister Maeve read it twice. Aunt Patty held it up to the candlelight and ran a finger down the dates. Belinda Vance, the wedding planner, looked at me and gave me a small nod. She had seen the bottom row before I had ever printed it. Patricia Brennan, halfway down the table, said softly, more to herself than to anyone, 96 months every month. My mother said, across the corner of the table in the smallest voice I had ever heard her use, "Why didn't you tell us?" I said, "Because you would have asked for a loan." She closed her eyes. She put her hand over her mouth. I did not say it cruelly. I said it the way a doctor reads a diagnosis, flat, accurate, without raising my voice. I picked up my phone. I turned the screen toward the table. The picture was of the ivory crepe gown hanging from a hook in B. Pickett's dressing room, with the pin pattern still visible on the bust. I said, "Tomorrow I'm wearing this one. It costs $380. B. Pickett altered it for free." My mother stared at the photo. I opened my clutch. I pulled out a folded paper napkin. It was the napkin from the morning of July 28th, 2018, with the number 80,000 in my own 22-year-old handwriting, in blue ballpoint, slightly smudged at the edges from 7 years of living in the back of my wallet. I laid the napkin on the white tablecloth next to my father's wine glass. I said, 8 years ago, the morning you emptied my savings account, I wrote that number on a napkin in my bedroom. I told myself by the time I was 30, I would have it. Tonight I have 92. I beat my own number by 12. If you have ever loved someone who confused control with love, I want to hear how you drew your line in the comments below. Tell me what you said, or that you didn't say anything at all and just walked. Both count. There is no right way to leave. I looked at my father. I said calmly, Dad, Mom, Belinda will help you both find your way out tonight. The wedding is still tomorrow. You're welcome to come as guests, not as hosts. My father did not speak. He set down his wine glass. He folded the spreadsheet carefully into thirds, the way he had folded his Sunday paper. He laid it on the table next to his bread plate. He stood up. He picked up his coat. He turned for the door. My mother sat for one more second. She looked at the napkin. Then she stood up. She did not look at me. She followed him out. The door closed. Patricia Brennan stood up. She brought her hands together once, then again. Her clap was not loud. It was the kind of clap a woman does when she is 40 years into being a mother and has finally seen something she has been waiting to see. Andrea, my college friend on my left, stood up too. Then Janelle, then Belinda, then Wesley's sister, then Wesley's father. They were not applauding loudly. They were standing the way you stand for something quiet that matters. Wesley stood up last. He took my hand. He pulled me up beside him. He said into the side of my hair, I love you. I'm so proud of you. I let him hold my hand for the rest of the night. Saturday, September 13th, 2025. At 4 p.m, I got married at Crowley Barn Venue in Falmouth, Maine. The light was the color of honey on the long pine floorboards. The barn doors were open at the back. The Cosmos and Queen Anne's lace Sabina had set in mason jars along the windowsills moved slightly in the breeze. The chairs my father had put a deposit on were filled with Wesley's family. Bea Pickett, who drove down from Norway in her '96 Buick, wearing a hat she had made the night before. Donna from the print shop in her good blouse. 3 of the women whose weddings I had shot in the past 7 years. Andrea, Janelle, Janet at the back near the entrance with a clipboard, and Sabina Lopez, the florist, who had come early to set the Cosmos and Queen Anne's lace in the windows. Skip Holloway played a quiet Brandi Carlile song on a small speaker as Maeve walked up the aisle as my matron of honor. There was no front row reserved for my parents. There was no row at all where they would have sat. Wesley's mother, Patricia Brennan, in a soft moss-green dress, walked herself to the second pew from the front and sat down in the seat closest to the aisle. She left the first pew empty on both sides. I do not know if she did it on purpose. I think she did. I walked myself down the aisle in a 1976 ivory crepe gown that cost $380. The hem brushed the floor. The buttons down the back had been resewn by Bea Pickett's grandson on a Thursday. I carried a small bouquet of Cosmos. Wesley waited at the end. He cried quietly, in the calm way he does, the way he had cried on the pier in July of 2024, holding his breath for me again. I did not speak to my parents for the next 18 months. My mother wrote letters. She wrote a long one in October that came in a cream-colored envelope with her loopy handwriting on the front. Another at Christmas with a card from L.L. Bean. 2 more in the spring. I put them in a shoebox under the bed in our apartment, unopened. I did not throw them away. I did not read them. I let the box sit. My father drove past our apartment in Portland twice that I know of. He did not ring the bell. He did not call. He drove past slowly both times in his Ford F-150, and then he kept driving. The second time he was wearing the leather jacket from 1987. Wesley saw him from the window. He did not say anything to me until after dinner. The $45,000 and change I had left in the Bangor Federal Credit Union became the down payment on a small saltbox house in Cape Elizabeth, 3 blocks from the Two Lights Light station. We closed in February 2026. Wesley measured every doorway with his carpenter pencil before we made the offer. The house had been built in 1938 by a man who had laid the floorboards himself. The kitchen window faced east. I would learn, in the year after we moved in, that the sun came up over the lighthouse on January mornings in a way that made the whole room turn pink for about 4 minutes. I never asked the napkin for permission again. It had done its job. I taped it to the inside of my moleskin on the page where I had written, in August 2018, the rule that started everything. I keep the moleskin in the kitchen drawer next to the silverware where it has lived for almost a decade. 2 years after the wedding, in 2027, I started teaching a Saturday workshop at the Portland YWCA. The class was free. It was called Your First Savings Account. I taught it in a small upstairs room with a folding table and 6 metal chairs. I brought my own coffee. 6 women came to the first session. 5 of them were under 30. 1 was 48 and had just left a marriage. My first student was a 22-year-old named Greta, who showed up in a thrifted parka and sat in the front row with her hands folded. She had short blonde hair cut by herself in a bathroom mirror. She had 2 notebooks in front of her. She did not raise her hand once. She just listened. She told me, in the second hour on a coffee break in the hallway, that her father had drained her birthday fund 3 weeks ago, and her mother had told her not to be dramatic about it. I did not say anything for a long second. I felt my own 22-year-old self in the room with me. I felt the Corolla and the futon and the napkin in the back of my wallet. After class, I walked over to her by the door. I took my moleskin out of my bag, the one with the napkin taped inside. I handed it to her. I told her to keep it. I told her to write her own rule on the first blank page that nobody else would ever read, and to keep it for as long as she needed to keep it. She held it in 2 hands. She did not open it. She put it inside her parka, against the inside of her coat, against her chest. The way you carry something you know you are not going to lose. She asked me before she left what my father used to say. I told her. He used to say, money's just money. Family is forever. He was half right.